Stamp collecting is more than a hobby. It can be a window into our past.
The India-Pakistan dispute over Kashmir is a good example. They've been fighting for years over territory that they both claim as theirs. Now that Al-Qaeda has come on the scene, real violence is even more likely. And both countries have access to nuclear weapons. Today, no place is really far enough away to ignore, or maybe I should say, not to worry about. The history of how India got its independence and how Pakistan became a separate country is easy to trace through stamps, and maybe easier to understand and a lot more fun than reading big thick history books and long-winded articles. For centuries, India was a hub of overland trade. Then, in the 15th century, Vasco da Gama brought to Europe the news of India's riches in spices and other useful items, and Europeans began to try to figure out how to get their hands on the riches India held. For more than 200 years, Europeans came to India, and by the early 18th century, Britain and France had large areas of influence. Within the next 50 years, significant areas in the east, west, and south of India, those areas outside what were known as the Indian princely states, were under the control of the British East India Company. There were also 3 small Portuguese colonial enclaves and 5 French colonial cities. And all of them produced postage stamps tracing their historical legacies. These stamps, the circular Dawkes stamps of the Sindh district, were printed in 1852. They were issued by the East India Company, which was a joint stock company and a mega corporation, trading mainly with the Indian subcontinent. Taking advantage of the riches of India, they traded salt, indigo dye, saltpeter, tea, and a great deal of opium. Letters with the circular stamps were delivered by ox cart, camel, or runners with spears, as illustrated by these stamps issued years later by the British government. In 1854, 2 years after the Dawkes, stamps were issued showing the profile of Queen Victoria, making them seem to be British government stamps. But really, the East India Company was a commercial enterprise in which the government of Great Britain had no shares and only indirect control. The East India Company had its own army and used it to rule over almost half of the land of India not controlled by the Indian princely states. 3 years later, in 1857, because of the abuses and exploitation used by the East India Company, the Sepoy Revolution and other smaller conflicts broke out. This is considered India's first war of independence from colonial rule. These are the Rebellion Centennial stamps, issued in 1957 by both India and Pakistan, one of the few times the countries have agreed about anything for more than 6 decades. The result of the rebellion of 1857 was not independence, but control of the Indian colonies being taken over by the British government, which then issued stamps showing India as a British Crown colony. 19 years later, in 1876, stamps were issued showing the British India Empire. In 1911, George V visited India and was crowned the Emperor of the British Empire of India. A special crown was created for the event full of emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and diamonds, and it cost, in today's money, over 4.5 million British pounds. It weighed almost 2 pounds and was so heavy it gave the king a headache. According to Wikipedia, no British king has worn it again. A special stamp cancellation marks the event, which was attended by many heads of the Indian princely states. The British Empire of India existed throughout the reigns of most of the 20th century British monarchs, whose profiles appeared on all the stamps of British India. The French colonial governments issued the most impressive stamps, many showing actual Indian monuments and scenes. The 5 French cities continued their autonomy long after the British, and were only ceded to the Indian Republic in 1954. The Portuguese colony stamps reveal another interesting bit of history. They show the evolution of the country of Portugal from a kingdom to a republic, and try to show that despite all the rest, These territories were going to remain Portuguese, but eventually they too fell to the power of an independent India. In 1961, the Portuguese Indian colony and enclaves were invaded by the Indian military and annexed to the Republic of India. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, prior to India's independence, the independent princely states were governed indirectly by the British government. These areas used British India stamps with the name of each princely state overprinted on them. There were other areas called feudatory states, which stubbornly printed their own stamps. The designs didn't make any reference to British India. But the stamps were only good on mail within their own state. For mail to be delivered elsewhere in India, British India postage had to be added. Finally, on August 15, 1947, the British Empire of India was dissolved and partitioned by the British into two countries based on the religion of each area, India and Pakistan. On that Independence Day, India issued newly designed stamps. Pakistan at first just overprinted British colonial stamps with their own Pakistan designs. The government of India was officially established as a republic on January 26, 1950. These two stamps honor the most influential figures in gaining independence for their countries: Mahatma Gandhi in India and Muhammad Ali Jinnah in Pakistan. Maybe, without them, these countries and the world would be a much different place. The stamps of India are a simple and interesting way to explore the history of the world's largest democracy and provide some insight into the challenges of the two countries, India and Pakistan, that were once one, the British Empire of India. Disputes over borders, such as those with Kashmir, seem almost inevitable. Understanding the complexities of the relationship between India and Pakistan and their border disputes in Kashmir is important in helping to find a solution. If none is found, the world may have to deal with the alternative.